All right, I know people are going to continue kind of filtering in as they wrap up the break, but to stay on schedule, we're going to go ahead and get started with our next speaker. She is Joanne Culin. She's a warning coordination meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Amarillo. Today, she is going to be talking to us about what we can expect for spring and summer in the Panhandle. So let's welcome Joanne to the stage.
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here again. Hopefully, the last time I was here was the day after the Smokehouse Creek fire. So hopefully, history does not repeat itself going into the spring. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the spring and summer outlooks weather-wise. Where's the... And I don't know that it's advancing. All right, so taking a look, first of all, at the rainfall that we saw last year, we saw actually a pretty decent amount of rainfall spread out across most of the growing season, the spring and summer months. We didn't have any necessarily large amount of rain that fell at one time, but it was sort of spread out across the spring and summer months pretty well. So you could see some areas got a little bit more than others across some of the eastern and northeastern parts of the panhandles. So this is the departure from normal. So this gives you a little bit better look at how much rain fell last year. The purples are anywhere from 3 to 8 inches above normal. The reds are the departures from normal. So unfortunately, the southeast parts of the Panhandle were probably the area that saw the least amount of rain, but the best rainfall fell from anywhere from roughly Duff Smith County and then kind of up the Highway 60 corridor up to parts of the northeast. So taking a look at some of the growing season anomalies, we started out having some of the wettest part being early in the season, which we would expect. The spring months and then the early parts of the summer, we had pretty continuous rainfall that occurred across the area with some overnight weather events that came through. But as we got through the latter parts of the growing season, you can see where some of that rainfall really dropped off, especially, again, in that southeastern or southern parts of the Texas Panhandle. The northern parts still got a good bit of rain, but the southern parts definitely did not. So taking a look at what we've seen the water year, October through what we are currently, we haven't really had a whole lot of rainfall. We haven't had a lot of precipitation. And I know I don't really have to tell you guys that. You're pretty familiar with it. But luckily we had some snow. What little bit we got. Some areas, especially in the southeast part, got the most of snow, and then some parts of the east got some of the higher amounts. But if you were in the northwest parts of the Panhandle, you kind of got left out of that snow, unfortunately, and there hasn't been a whole lot of rainfall events as well. So that is indicated a little bit more from this departure from normal. You can see the yellows are about 1 to 2 inches below normal. The oranges are 2 to 3 inches below normal, and then the darker orange is 3 to 4 inches. So we have some room to make up, definitely, as we head into the spring months. This lack of rainfall gives, a threat for wildfires, which we're already kind of getting into our main fire season. Another concern that we look at is, if there's failed crops, how is that going to affect dust? If you were in any of the areas that were highly impacted from the big dust that we saw last March 14th, that is definitely a concern that we look at as we get through our high wind season. And then, what kind of green up impacts will we have? We definitely need more rainfall for that. So like I said, we did not have a lot of help so far this season from snowfall. That was sort of to be expected, actually. We're not totally out of winter, so it still could happen, but it certainly doesn't feel like it would happen. But last year, we really were about average for snowfall. We just had that one really big event in early January that dumped about 9 inches of snow here in Amarillo. And this year we haven't really had, a whole lot of snow and really not even a big event. The snowfall main contribution we've had this year was from the one at the end of January, the 24th, 25th. The highest amounts that we saw in the panhandles were anywhere from like Tulia to Clarendon to maybe Shamrock area, so the southeast panhandles, and they had 10 to 12 inches of snow, and that was about it. Everywhere else averaged, anywhere from 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 inches. So not a whole lot from snow, unfortunately. So this is the current drought monitor. We do have a new one coming out this Thursday, so we're sort of in between cycles. So you can see that drought is definitely affecting a large portion of the state. Some of the moderate droughts really creeping back into the southeast that, again, didn't have that help in the growing season last year. Got a little bit of snow help this year, but it really hasn't had a lot of, relief from the drought. And then the change from last year is definitely seeing, believe it or not, there is not much of a change in a large part of the panhandles, but there is some degradation there in the south again. You can tell where the hill country flooding occurred over the spring or July 4th weekend. That's where the improvement has come down in the central parts of the state. But overall, the state is suffering pretty badly from drought conditions. So this is a look at soil moisture, the 0 to 100 centimeter soil moisture percentiles. So obviously red is low percentiles. The greens are much wetter, and you can see how drastically different we are from last year. This time last year. We had a little bit of soil moisture because we had a little bit better snowfall, and we did have a wet November last year, but this year we don't have any of that. So we've been pretty dry. And then the seasonal drought outlook through April 30th is not giving any great, news. It just continues the drought development is likely. At least we're not, in some of the higher categories, but it definitely is indicating a continuation of the drought. So what sort of causes all of this, or it contributes to it, if not necessarily causes it? So we look in the weather world a lot when we talk about climate at El Nino and La Nina. Are you guys pretty familiar with that? Okay. So for those who are not, we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But this year we've been seeing La Nina conditions. We haven't, and we probably won't be a technically official La Nina event, but the conditions have definitely been there. And that was the case last year as well, but this year we've really seen the impacts of that a little bit more. It's definitely been a very La Nina feel to our winter season. So if you're not familiar with El Nino and La Nina, so it is an ocean atmosphere coupled event. It's basically the sea surface temperature anomalies that are measured in that highlighted area there. There's a few various regions, but the main one that we do measure those sea surface temperature anomalies is in that Nino 3.4 region. They're measured in 3-month averages, so if you ever see these maps or graphs, and you'll see some coming up, you'll see things like December, January, February, March, April, May, so they're in 3-month averages. And 5 consecutive 3-month averages of above half degree or below half degree is required to declare it an El Nino or a La Nina. So these do tend to reach their max strength during the October to February time period. So that's why we talk a lot about it when it comes to winter events and snowfall. And so we look at it a lot more in the winter. It has some effects in other parts of the year, but it's really max during that time period. Okay, so this is what we're looking at in the oceans now, the sea surface temperature anomalies, and we've highlighted that area of the Nino 3.4 region, or the whole La Nina there area. And then the bottom map is kind of a cross-section of that area, so if you look at the depth of the ocean, obviously the blue means a negative anomaly, the red is a warm anomaly. So for a while we've been having cold sea surface temperature anomalies out in the Pacific, but there is, as you can see from all that warm water underneath, that's really eroding away, and we are heading out of whatever La Nina effects we were having into more of a neutral phase currently, and then probably into an El Nino, as we'll look at here in a minute. So what does this actually mean for our weather? So we look at the ocean, but there is a weather component to that. So for La Nina phases, the jet stream does go further north into the United States, and all the storm tracks go further north. So that leaves us in the drier, windier portion of the country. It's not that we can't have rain and we can't have snow and we can't have, wet months or wet periods, but overall, the long span of it, we are tending to be drier and windier and warmer than normal. And that's why I say this winter, we really felt that effects, right? Because December was pretty warm. We've been dry. While we got a little cold in January for a little bit, we were roughly, for the average temperature for Amarillo at least, we were roughly about average, maybe like less than a degree below. And then February, we're already, starting to be warm again. So it's definitely felt more La Nina-ish. Whereas El Nino, you do have the storm tracks that come across further in the southern parts of the United States. It gets to be wetter, cooler, just because you have more potential for rainy days, cloudy days. And you just get more precipitation or moisture across the area. So this is the current forecast. So there's a couple of graphs here. The first one is the model predictions for a lot of different climate models as to what they're predicting in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies. So I've highlighted where that would hit El Nino and La Nina criteria. You can see that a lot of those are maybe briefly remaining in La Nina, and then we shoot on out of that into what's called the neutral phase, where you're neither of those types of episodes, and then we go back into an El Nino for the latter parts of the summer, fall, sometime in there. And then the other graph is the probabilities of that. The blue is La Nina probabilities, the gray is neutral probabilities, and the red is El Nino probabilities. And you can see that as we get, and these are in those 3-month averages again, as we get out of the latter half of the winter into the spring and early summer months, we hit the neutral phase, which is sort of a toss-up. We could have, similarities to either of those phases at that point. There's no strong impact or influence one way or the other. And then we get into El Nino as we get towards the summer. Doesn't go far enough out, but my guess is that will be our main climate pattern as we get into the winter months. So I don't want to take a whole lot of time talking about this type of oscillation. Sometimes we talk about some of our longer term patterns, but there is a pattern in the Pacific that it doesn't cause El Nino or La Nina, but it contributes to the development and intensity of those episodes. So this has probably played a little bit of a role in why this winter we felt more like it's La Nina and dry and warm and windy, and but apparently its greatest influence is during neutral, which is what we're going to be in. Unfortunately, it's not a very long-term cycle. It changes every 30 to 60 days, so it's not quite as long-term as El Nino, La Nina. It's a much shorter cycle, and it's hard to predict outside of any of that, but it does have an influence on the temperature and precipitation patterns across the U.S. The two that are most significant during the winter, and I feel like this is what we've been seeing, is the heavy precipitation in the West Coast, which they've had some of that, and then the cold outbreaks in the East Coast, which all the cold air has been bottled up going towards the East Coast this year. So I think this is really playing a little bit more of a role in helping enhance some of those El Nino, La Nina patterns that we've seen this year. So how many of you are familiar with the Climate Prediction Center's website with these types of graphics? Okay, a few of you, good. If you're not, these are a great resource that you can access. They produce the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day outlooks in these graphics. Every day they update at 2 o'clock every afternoon, roughly 2:30, somewhere in there. And they just give you, and they have longer outlooks as well. They have seasonal outlooks, they have 1 month, 3 month, but they do these shorter term ones as well. And they basically just show you the probability or the percent chance of being above and below normal for temperature and precipitation. So, you know, the dark red doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be hot. It just means that it's your higher probability or higher chance of seeing above normal temperatures. Likewise, the green with the precipitation. So we're going to kind of go through some of the near-term outlooks. The graphs at the top are for the Amarillo area, but it's probably very, very similar for a lot of the panhandles. So you can see as we get through the middle of February to getting into the end of February, we have pretty high chances, a 72% chance of being above normal, and then not much relief in the rainfall. We are looking at potential for rain this weekend, so we're, you know, fingers crossed that will pan out. Not, you know, inches and inches like, you know, we might want, but, you know, we'll take anything we can get at this point. And then as we get into the latter parts of February, again, we stay above normal with sort of equal chances of normal precipitation. So kind of seeing the influence of, you know, that neutral phase starting to come in, of having kind of a toss-up for precipitation. The winter outlook, this is what we presented back in, this was issued back in November. So just kind of looking at how it's actually panned out so far this year. It was a little less aggressive in terms of the temperature. It probably could have been more above normal. It was a little bit more equal chances, but we have definitely more than not been above normal for temperatures this winter. And then, of course, we've been below normal for precipitation. So it definitely favored a La Nina type pattern. The winter outlook, this is for February, just in total. Again, it jives with what those other weekly graphics showed with above normal and below normal precipitation. So taking a little bit of a look at some of the snow that we would get in some of these different scenarios. I know we haven't had a whole lot of snow this winter, but this just kind of goes to show you that it's on par with what we would have expected for La Nina and neutral phases. 26 La Nina years have occurred since 1950, and you can see that most of them fall below average in terms of snowfall amounts. It's not that we don't get snow, we just tend to have those lower amounts during those La Nina years. Same thing during neutral. The neutral trends towards to kind of the middle of the road, but below average mostly in terms of snowfall. Of course, you always are going to have those outlier years as well, where something really has a lot of kind of bucks the trend and really gives you a lot of snowfall. But then looking ahead, if we do end up going into an El Nino for next winter, it does tend to favor a little bit more of a spread. You can have below average, but your above average numbers have increased quite a bit there. But you are actually more favorable to get some of those really high amount seasons. So the 30 plus inches there has occurred 5 times in those 25 years of El Nino. If that happens, I might leave the city because I don't want a ton of snowfall, but we do have that potential as we get into next winter if we do stay in that trend of being an El Nino. Not to dwell too much on this slide, but when we talk about, when we try to show how the climate may react in the future, we look at how the ocean atmospheric is reacting now and how it compares to different years. So we call those analog years. They're comparison years. And it's our best educated guess as to how, it might turn out later in the season. So these were all the ones that we had looked at in our office. The green highlighted ones are probably our best years to compare to, as compared to what's going on right now. They have the best depiction of what the sea surface temperature anomalies are doing right now. And we'll talk about the analog years coming up in a second here. The spring outlook also favors more of a above normal temperature and equal chances of rainfall. So again, that falls into that more of a toss-up neutral phase. So talking about the spring with those analog years, we took those years and looked to see how they compared for different cities across the southern plains, how they compared in terms of rainfall, snowfall, various weather aspects. So most of them do favor below, or about half of them favor below normal rainfall amounts, unfortunately, heading into the spring. But there are some of those outliers, of course, that do have some of the higher amounts as well. Looking further into the summer, again, you get further out, if we stay in that neutral phase, it gets a little bit more murky as to, what we're going to be seeing, but you could pretty much count on, and I always like to say, who doesn't say it's going to be above normal in the summer? But you can count on above normal in the summer for temperature, but again, equal chances. And some of that's going to depend how quickly do we transition into different phases, and how much of that Madden-Julian oscillation plays a role into it as well. And that's not something we'll know until, 30 to 60 days out. But taking a look at some of the summer rainfall, it looks a little bit more promising, I guess. But still, some of those, depending on where you are in the Panhandle, some of those feature below normal. About half of them are below normal. But 30, 40%. If you're closer to Dodge City, 63% of them favor above normal rainfall in the summer. So we'll be crossing our fingers for that, of course. Trying to get some moisture here in the summer. Last summer wasn't too terrible, at least in the amount of time that I've been here, which has been only about 3 years. So kind of looking at spring severe weather season, this is the number of watch days, the anomaly. So the red would be higher watches, the blue would be lower watches. It does favor more of a earlier start to severe season, in that February to March timeframe, rather than having it later into the spring. So something as we shift towards, El Nino, we may have an earlier start to some severe weather this year. The good news is, though, that if we are transitioning into a La Nina to neutral or La Nina to El Nino, it does not favor a whole lot of tornadoes, or a very active year at least, in terms of number of tornadoes in the Panhandle. 55% of the years with greater than 25 tornadoes have occurred, more so during El Nino, or if we transition from El Nino to La Nina, but the other way around, it's a pretty low number. So hopefully it won't be very active in terms of that. And a lot of that we think is due to, tornadoes need moisture to develop, and we just don't have that in those La Nina years, like we do with the El Nino years. So our average number of tornadoes that we get in the Panhandles is about 18 to 20. And so these analog years that we talked about, that we looked at, the comparison years, most of them show a below normal for tornadoes across the Panhandles, which, hey, at least that's good news, right? As we get into our fire weather season, which is we're in it anytime it's we've been freeze cured, but especially as we get into the high wind seasons of February, March, into early April, we are looking more and more at fire weather. Of course, just a reminder, the La Nina promotes, that northern track for storms to go to the north, so we have more opportunity for drier air to come in, strong winds. We're already, dry out there, so it doesn't take much for fires to be a concern. We had, some pretty decent ones in the last few days across the Panhandles, including one here in Amarillo. So just taking a look at the fire outlook, this is the fuels outlook from the Texas Forest Service. They have a lot of the panhandles into normal to above normal. If you get up towards like Beaver County, Oklahoma, they're more into that exceptional category. So again, above normal fire weather conditions are expected. And then just with the La Nina conditions ending rapidly, it's a little harder to know how active it could be, but it's definitely primed to be active. So this is just kind of a summary of what I discussed. We're getting out of La Nina into more of a neutral or El Nino conditions later into the spring and summer months. And then we would anticipate a near average severe season. Temperatures have equal chances depending on the parts of the year, precipitation does. Temperatures are generally above normal. And then, we have pretty good fuel out there. Dryness has led to ground moisture being much lower than normal, so fire weather is definitely a concern. So I will take any questions anybody may have, either now or after I think I'm the one that stands between you guys and lunch, so.
I just had a quick question. Growing up here, I seem to remember that there were more tornadoes kind of in the Amarillo area that were kind of severe. And I've heard that is kind of shifted a little to the east, more to like maybe Oklahoma City area. Is that true, and can you tell us why?
Well, having spent 16 years in Mississippi, I can tell you that it's very active over there. I don't know that it's shifting. We can definitely have, our bigger years for tornadoes. We've just not been in those types of years recently. But it is definitely expanding. I don't know that it's necessarily shifting. It's definitely expanding. There's probably a climatological weather reason why, but there's also a human reason. There's more detection of those with radar. Everyone's got their cell phone out. Chasers are out. So there's more detection of some of those that maybe we didn't see in the past. Just the technology has improved. I know living in Mississippi, we have a ton of trees over there. And technology and radar has improved probably about 10 or 11 years ago to where we can, even if we aren't sure there's a tornado, we can detect tornado debris off of radar signatures. So that has helped improve the detection of tornadoes as well. So while there probably is some sort of long-term climatology reason, there's also that as well. But it's definitely, I think a lot of people are realizing how it's expanded further than just your traditional tornado alley.
Do you think this expansion of Tornado Alley could also be related to climate change?
I mean, it's possible. It's hard to always, pinpoint, a specific season or a specific thing to climate change. But overall, there's a lot of variations that we are seeing related to some of the climate. So it could be some of that. You definitely need some of that warm, moist air to develop thunderstorms and more water vapor in the air to help develop those thunderstorms. And like I said, they need moisture to develop. So it's definitely possible that is partly related, at least. I don't know specifically if, what the studies have shown or if there is conclusive studies on that. But I do know that there's a lot of studies that say that more extreme events can occur. So that would include tornadoes. Okay, well, thank you so much.